The war ended the way most things did in this quadrant. Quietly, with a blinking light turning from red to administrative beige. One moment we were expendable auxiliaries, statistically acceptable losses in someone else's glorious victory. And the next, we were standing around with nothing to shoot at and too many forms to sign. Someone handed me a ration bar that tasted like regret compressed into protein, and I was chewing on it when the translator implant chimed and informed me I was about to receive my reward. I laughed out loud, loud enough that a nearby alien quartermaster flinched and dropped a data slate. Humans had learned early not to trust the word reward when it came from species who measured time and stellar life cycles and casualties in percentages with 6 decimals. I asked if the translation might be off. The implant helpfully clarified that it was not. The Queen would be arriving shortly, personally, to my assigned tent. I made a joke about upgrading the tent, because humor is what you do when reality has clearly made a wrong turn. The implant paused, as if unsure whether joke was a military tactic. Then it advised me to prepare myself with dignity. I checked my reflection in a polished power cell and decided dignity was currently on back order. When she arrived, there were no trumpets, no guards marching in step. Just a soft shift in the air, like the universe leaning in to see what would happen next. She stepped inside, as if this was a place she was allowed to be uncertain. She looked human enough that my brain tried to relax, then failed when it noticed the wrong details. Skin carrying a faint, living sheen, like light trapped under ice. Eyes reflecting more colors than my implant could label. Hair moving with a logic that didn't fully agree with gravity. She regarded me in silence. I regarded her in what I hoped passed for respectful confusion. "I believe," I said finally, "there's been a clerical error. I ordered extra water rations, not a monarch." The translator hesitated, then rendered my words. To my surprise, she made a sound that might have been amusement. She explained, carefully, formally, that this was no error. Her people repaid debts with presents, not objects. Victory demanded something personal. She had chosen to come herself. I told her that was incredibly flattering and deeply alarming, possibly in the wrong order. I suggested medals, statues, a nice plaque. She listened as if each word mattered, which somehow made it worse. Around us, the tent hummed with borrowed power, alien technology pretending not to eavesdrop. Outside, an empire waited. Inside, I realized the war might be over, but the strange part was just beginning. They told us the war ceremony would be brief, which was how I knew it wouldn't be. Alien cultures loved calling things brief when they actually meant spiritually life-altering. I stood in line with other humans, boots sinking slightly into the adaptive floor as it tried and failed to guess my species' preferred gravity. Somewhere overhead, drones hummed like anxious insects, recording everything for archives no one would ever re-watch except historians and one very judgmental algorithm. The Victory Hall dimmed, lights shifting into colors my eyes couldn't fully agree on. My neural translator pinged softly. the equivalent of a throat clearing. Attention, sovereign presence imminent. I muttered that I wished it would clear its throat somewhere else. It ignored me, as usual. She appeared without announcement, because announcing yourself is unnecessary when you rule half a spiral arm. The hall reacted before we did, fields adjusting, pressure stabilizing, reality smoothing itself like a bedspread. She walked toward us, not as a conqueror, but as someone fulfilling an obligation she took personally. That somehow was more unsettling. When she stopped in front of me, the translator struggled, then settled on reverent clarity. I tried not to salute, bow, or faint. She spoke of debts and balance, of how humans had held lines that should have collapsed, how our losses had shifted. Probabilities the war planners would study forever. I nodded like I understood galactic economics, and not like someone who once got lost in his own base. Then she said my designation, correctly, with the right pauses. I joked that hearing it from a queen made it sound more impressive than it felt. There was a flicker in her expression, confusion, then something like delight. Humor, it seemed, was not common in victory rites. She explained that among her people, such service demanded acknowledgement beyond ceremony. Not medals, not land, a choice. Her choice. Herself, for a single cycle, offered freely. No command, no expectation. The hall went very quiet. The kind of quiet that knows history is happening and doesn't want to interrupt. I laughed, because if I didn't, my brain would have rebooted. I asked if there was a return policy. The translator took a second, then conveyed it. To my surprise, she laughed too. An unguarded sound that made several drones calibrate in panic. Around us, an empire waited to see what a human would do when victory stopped being abstract. And for the first time since the war began, the next move wasn't written in anyone's strategy tables. The tent they assigned me was larger than my apartment back home and significantly more polite. The fabric shimmered with a soft internal light, responding to my breathing like it was trying to be reassuring. I told it not to get attached. It pulsed anyway. Somewhere beyond the walls, a city celebrated the end of a war with music that bent around physics, notes stretching longer than they should, as if refusing to let the moment pass. She arrived without guards, which felt like a test. The entrance parted silently, and suddenly the most powerful being in the region was standing on a floor that squeaked under my boots. I apologized to her for the noise. She looked down, then back up at me, and said it was acceptable. I decided that was progress. We stood there for a moment, two people trapped in a ritual neither of us had personally designed. Her presence was overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with threat. Power radiated from her, yes, but restrained, folded inward by deliberate choice. I offered her a seat. The tent provided one immediately, like it had been waiting for permission. She raised what I had learned was an eyebrow, equivalent amused. She asked questions that weren't on any diplomatic script. What humans did when wars ended, whether we celebrated or slept. I told her usually both, sometimes in the wrong order. I asked her if queens ever got tired of being symbols. She considered that longer than any treaty clause I had ever heard discussed, then said yes, frequently, but that symbols rarely got sick days. The neural field between us translated more than words. Intent leaked through, emotions softened at the edges so they wouldn't cut. She explained that her people believed proximity was the only honest way to repay a life debt. Distance, they thought, was how lies survived. I joked that humans usually preferred thank you notes. She smiled, just slightly, like she was collecting the idea for later. Time stretched, not awkwardly, but carefully. We talked about the war, without recounting it, circling the grief instead of stepping on it. At one point, the tent offered refreshments neither of us recognized. I took a cautious sip and announced it tasted like regret with citrus notes. She laughed again, more easily this time, and the sound made the walls brighten. When silence finally settled, it wasn't heavy. It felt chosen. I realized then that this wasn't a reward or a test. It was an experiment. 2 species, 1 fragile moment, and no command telling either of us what came next. For the first time since the fighting ended, I wasn't waiting for orders or alarms. I was just present. And somehow that felt more dangerous than battle ever had. Morning in the Victory District arrived without sunlight. Instead, the city shifted tones, walls adjusting their color temperature until the air itself suggested dawn. I woke before the change, which surprised me. For most of the war, sleep had been something that happened to other people. Now it came easily, and that worried me more than artillery ever had. She was already awake, standing near the tent's open seam, watching the city pretend to be peaceful. I told her that on Earth, mornings usually came with coffee and regret. She asked which one was mandatory. I said regret, definitely. She nodded like that, explained a great deal about human history. There were things left unsaid between us, but they no longer felt like traps. The ritual had ended at some invisible point in the night, dissolving not with ceremony, but with mutual understanding. No guards arrived to escort her back. No officials burst in to declare the debt settled. Power, I realized, was quietly disappointed when it didn't get to make noise. She told me her council was uneasy. A queen who crossed boundaries voluntarily made governance messy. I told her humans specialized in messy systems and still somehow survived, mostly. She smiled at that, and for the first time, it wasn't careful. It was just hers. When the formal summons finally came, it wasn't for punishment or praise. It was an offer. An alliance written not in blood or contracts, but precedent. She had chosen presence over command, and now her people had to live with the consequences. I was asked to stay, not as a soldier, but as a witness, I joked that I charged by the hour. No one laughed except her, which felt like winning something important. As we walked through the city together, no longer hidden, I felt the weight of who I had been loosen. Not erased, just set down. The war hadn't made me stronger. It had made me smaller. This choice, this refusal to treat survival, or as the end goal, had stretched me back out again. At the transport gate, she stopped. There was no dramatic farewell, no vow carved into history, just a shared pause. She said that being chosen without coercion was rarer than victory. I told her humans were stubborn like that. We didn't like rewards we couldn't say no to. When I finally boarded, the city shifted tones again, brighter this time. Not a celebration, just acknowledgement. As the ship lifted, I realized I wasn't leaving something behind. I was carrying it forward. The war had taught me how to endure. She had taught me how to decide. For the first time, the future didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like an invitation.